All right, recording's on, and I'm talking to Paige. Paige, I should have asked you this before we started. Say your last name for me.
Terrio rhymes with
Theriot.
stereo.
Ooh, that's nice. I
Yeah.
like that. Thank you. I'd rather just ask you than butcher it. So
I'm surprised because you're from New Orleans, right? Or Louisiana?
I am, but you can't tell how you spell those words. You never know.
But that's like
It,
Smith in Louisiana.
it is. That's true,
Stereo is
Terrio.
so
But
common.
are you
Yeah.
in Louisiana?
No, but my family of origin is from there.
Okay. See, I never want to assume because like pronunciations for things where I grew up were so weird.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, that like I never want to assume that like, oh yeah, that's how other people say it too. Because there's actually no telling. And I picked up a ton of bad language there. Sorry, this is a random tangent, but like when I first started dating my wife, I would say things like where you stay, which where I grew up meant like what
Yeah.
neighborhood are you from? But
Yeah.
that doesn't translate in other parts of the country.
Oh, no?
I'd be like, where do you stay? She'd be like, at my house. I'd be like, yeah, but where's that? So like it's just
It's awkward.
all these weird, yeah. I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go make some lunch, which in New Orleans means like I'm gonna go somewhere and buy something. So like we're like, oh, I'm gonna go
Oh.
make some groceries. Like that means like I'm gonna go buy some groceries. Be like, I'm gonna go make
Like
some
an elf
lunch.
in a shop,
Yeah. She's like, oh,
tinkering
would you
away.
make me a sandwich too? I was like, I ain't making anything. It's like I'm gonna go make it a Taco Bell. So yeah, anyway, that's just a weird language thing. So I never assumed that the language I learned in New Orleans actually like translates to other
Yeah.
parts of the world.
That's probably very functional of you.
Yeah. Okay, so tell everybody that's listening and potentially watching where kind of where you are in your author journey and a little bit about your stuff.
Yeah, so I've written 16 books. I had published four of them back in like 2015, 2016, and I've since like taken them all down. It was all
Okay,
under a pen name.
nice.
Um,
Did you
but I,
did you indie publish them or were you with a
yep,
publisher? Okay.
yeah, and I like it. So I went through KDP and I just like figured it all out on my own.
Yeah.
And then this whole flux of people getting into the indie author scene and like talking about all the tips and tricks and stuff. I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
This would have been so nice.
Yep.
The community is so cool though. It's just wonderful to watch these people like learn it, rise through the ranks, like become
It's
mega
amazing.
successful, and
Yeah,
oh,
the indie author
it's
community
stunning.
is shockingly generous and
Yeah.
kind. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
It's the best. So I took them down recently actually because I'm kind of resetting.
Okay.
I had I have a lot of like revision resistance.
Hmm.
So I've had a hard time moving forward in
Huh.
any of the novels that I've written. I was really successful in poetry, and like when I was super young, like I won a bunch of awards and I had stuff
Wow.
published, and people were very supportive of me. So
Nice.
I'm like that's like the level of feedback that I think I still expect. And then like anytime somebody reads a little bit of my novels, they're like, oh, and like it's like
That's funny.
responding normally. But to me, I'm like, oh, you hate it. Like,
That's really
I'm
funny.
terrible.
Yeah.
So I have all this weird anxiety about it. I'm in therapy. It's
So, yeah.
fine.
It's really funny. Um, yeah. So that's that resistance is really interesting. What are your hopes for the books that you've taken down? Are you rewriting them? Are you going to republish them? Like, what's your thought?
No, yeah. So those ones, I'm just like sweeping that project aside.
Okay.
They were all part of a series, and it was really funny to me at the time, and it's still really funny to me. So I might pick it up under that same pen name at some
Yeah.
point. But right now, I want to focus on like being who I am and figuring out my own voice and like being the thing that I want to be in the world. And that's what
Okay.
I've been looping on. Like, who do I want to be in the world, and what kind of impact do I want to have? And
That's awesome.
these people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's amazing. And they will push you to question and think about that. If you're listening, there's a child appeared, a very lovely
A small
and
child
cute
appeared.
child appeared in the video, which yeah, happens all the time with me
Yeah.
too.
Also, with them, like I pivoted, I was in biomedical engineering,
Oh
and I
wow,
pivoted from that into like parenting, and then also got ordained as a Taoist priest and like went real
wow,
deep into Taoism. So
yeah,
like I'm just a completely different human being from what
sure.
I
From when you wrote
was.
your first books, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So So yeah, I'm just like finding my voice and my footing and
Nice.
trying to make it authentic. I was also diagnosed with autism.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's been a whole process of unmasking and learning that it's okay to be what I am.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
don't have to fixate so hard on what the rules are and like following them so carefully. And
Hmm.
yeah, especially with writing, I've gotten really tripped up on that because anything that like a person in a position of authority told me, I took that to heart. And
Oh, wow.
it's been just like gospel for me. Like, oh, okay, you say that I have to do that. I will study 20 books on that thing. I will attend
Yeah.
classes. I will like work and work and work to do that thing perfectly. And then I'm just like falling farther and farther away from what makes it fun and
I understand.
what's me and what's special.
Yeah, and that comment about person in position of authority, I definitely have that too. Like I have this like, oh, yeah, so I've given you authority, so I have to do what you say, and I have to
Yep.
like obsess over it. And it is, as I've like matured as a writer, I think as a human, I recognize that like and I don't know if you're doing this, but part of what I do is the people that have authority have it because I gave it to them, not
Yeah.
necessarily because they deserve it. Or I mean, ideally I'm giving it to people that deserve it, but it's also like, oh, they have this power because I've given them this power. And I find, for me, part of the reason I give, since we're talking about therapy, I'm just going to have my own therapy session.
Go
For
for
me,
it.
part of the reason I give people power in that way and just do whatever they say is actually, for me, a cop out to actually think about critically what's going on. I'm like, well, if they're doing it, it has to be
Yep.
right. And
Yep.
it's uh, actually an escapist tactic for me to like,
Yep.
this way I don't have to think about it. I'll just do whatever they tell me to do.
Yep.
Yeah,
And a lot
that's
of
me.
it for
Yeah,
me too has been like harm reduction.
yeah.
I'm so terrified of being a harmful presence.
Hmm.
And that I will like,
Yeah,
I'll find a person who is like gentle and kind and seems to be resonating in a way that I want to. And I will just like, okay, I will do all the things.
yeah. I'll do everything you say.
All the
All the
things.
things.
And
Yeah,
it's like, oh, wait.
that's funny. So
I'm
what?
wearing clothes that don't fit, and this hat is not quite right for me. Like, let
Yeah,
me
I
reassess here.
I totally had 2 years of trying to rapid release books, um, which is just I'm not capable. And so it
Mm,
was I'd just take too long. But I had a year of trying to rapid release, and then a year of like, self-doubt and like feeling like an absolute failure because I couldn't pull it off. And then I
yeah.
did like 6 months of like, okay, like I only write 2 books a year. I should have known before that year that like all of a sudden just declaring I can write a book a month wasn't going to make a book a month possible. Um, just like, yelling it
And
into the sky. Yeah,
did Becca Syme help you with that? Like
she
questioning
did.
that
Yeah,
premise
she
and
did. Yeah. And she also
doing
helped
that?
me figure out what I was writing, because the like I was like, oh, I need to write to market. And so I did the Becca Sign Clifton Strengths. And
Yeah.
she was like, why are you writing in this genre? I'm like, because this is what people are buying. And she's like, yeah, but that's not your strengths. Well, it's what people I
Those
don't
clothes
know.
don't fit. That hat
These
looks
people
strange,
told
Jeff.
me,
What you
yeah,
doing?
these people I gave authority to because I don't want to think about it, because I just want to do what they tell me to do. They told me to do it. So I did it. Yeah, anyway. So where do you have any inclination of what you're gonna be writing or what direction you're going? You don't have to
Yeah.
answer that
So
if you don't want to. You can be like, I don't
I've
want to
just
talk about that.
been, yeah, no, I'm good with it. I've been playing. So
Awesome.
last year, I spent the whole year writing speculative fiction because I love it. And I've only
Yeah.
ever written literary fiction.
Okay.
So I went on this journey with speculative fiction. I wrote several fantasy books. I wrote a sci-fi book. And then like
Nice.
I went into the weeds and wrote this like ridiculous women's fiction that was all about like trauma and this Muslim sisterhood and just I had a moment.
Yeah.
Then I got back into my
It's pretty funny.
speculative fiction.
Yeah.
There's like a little bit of magical realism, but yeah. So I spent that year just doing speculative fiction, and then this year I've been focused just on romance. So
Okay.
that's part of the piece that I sent you, and then
Awesome.
I just finished writing the third book in that series, and it's going to be like a 5 book series,
Okay.
I think. But there might
Nice.
be more to it. So it might extend into next year, or I might take a year to just like input, because input's my number one.
Okay. Very cool. Um, so tell me, I love this conversation. my number 2 is individualization, and my number 3 is context. So like talking about the past and how you're a unique individual, I'll
Cool.
just do it all day. So it tweaks all of my buttons. So tell me about the piece that you sent me. Like, let's talk about that. Where's it at?
Yeah.
What?
So
Yeah.
that it's currently on its 5th draft. What I
Okay.
sent you was the rough.
Okay.
Because that had gotten the worst feedback that I've ever gotten.
Huh. Okay.
I had 10 beta readers go through not that draft, but the second draft of that same book. And like 9 of them couldn't finish it.
Oh, wow.
Most of those 9 were offended in some way.
Okay.
And then the one person who did finish it loved it. And she
Okay.
like totally got all the things and
Yeah.
and it was fine. And I also might have just been like fishing outside of the proper pond.
Sure.
And I might have like billed it wrong.
Yeah.
Because I was like, it's like romance, but if Eddie Izzard wrote it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And that fishing outside of a pond is really important. Like
right.
the first urban fantasy I wrote, I was very angry. I was leaving my like former life as an evangelical pastor. And so I wrote it about homeless people that cussed a ton. And
Yeah.
then I went and gave it to a bunch of people back in my evangelical world. Like I literally wrote it to be like, I'm going to demonstrate that I'm not part of this world and I'm really angry at this world. And then I went back and gave it to a bunch
Here you
of
go.
neighbors from that world. And I was like, what do you think of it? And they're like, we hate it. And I'm like,
That is the
I'm a
correct
terrible
response.
writer. And like it took me like 5
no.
years to be like, wait. I wrote it to declare that they would hate it, and then I gave it to them, and they responded the exact way I thought they would.
Oh, so
And
it was
then I was-
extremely successful.
And I was angry at my own at their response. Yeah, but that like finding the pond to give your book to is important.
Right, because I
Um,
had just asked in like a fiction group,
Yeah,
just like completely random people. So maybe that was part of it. But then I wrote it in a workshop with Daniel David Wallace,
okay.
who's
I love
lovely.
Daniel.
We love
He's
him.
great.
He's the
Yeah.
Mr. Rogers of our generation. He's great.
Yeah.
And then the cohort, just like the workshop was not what I had anticipated. I thought we were
Okay.
all writing a novel.
Yeah.
In this, it was like 16 weeks, and like I read a novel in 2 weeks. Like this is a workshop.
Yeah.
Just do the work.
You're gonna write a series in 16 weeks.
Yeah. So just the other folks didn't do that, and then like also I really wanted feedback. Like I had learned through my process and my play that I really need more feedback. Like I need a closer feedback loop.
Gotcha.
Because I can go into some weeds.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is great. Like people will actually be reading my work all the way through.
Yeah.
And then somebody will read a whole novel of mine and I'll get like feedback from it if it's resonating or not. And nobody read it. Like nobody read the whole novel. The most people
That's
read was
painful.
like 10 pages in. And that was this chunk that I sent you. And they were like, it's confusing. I don't understand. There's too much dialogue. And that's what I asked you. I was like,
Lies.
so
Sorry.
is there such a thing as too much dialogue? And even Daniel, he was like, so I looked through your book and like the structure of it, it's very sparse. Like you really need to add in more narration and more setting and have anchoring into meaning, and you need more sequels to your scenes. And like maybe you could just have a scene of her in the shower thinking about this after. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. This is not. And then I've been watching I watched all of your podcasts.
Thanks.
And well, you were like, watch one. And I was like, okay, I will watch all of them because I'm an intense person.
I love it. I'm the same, by the way.
I saw you
do the
like,
same thing. Yeah.
like scrolling through and saying like, look at the structure of this. And I see through the shape of this. This is very good. I'm like, that's the shape. That's the shape that I had.
It's really funny.
But, and I saw you speak at something. And you were speaking about maybe the Hunger Games or something. You had like several examples that they were like 70 to 90% dialogue.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of the way things were trending, and that's resonating with people more now because people are more visual. We're consuming more visual media, and dialogue is just tracking better. So
I was like,
I thought I did that thing because I studied very hard this genre.
Yeah.
And I tried to emulate it as best I could. And even the italics and the internal thoughts, that's a Damon Suede thing.
Yeah.
And like I saw Damon Suede and some other people do it, and I was like, okay, I will try that thing. This is new. And then you were like, I didn't know, do not. It
No,
was like,
I
maybe
didn't.
not with this.
No,
So I
and I
tried
actually
it.
think your italics are really good in this.
Well,
And
I
we'll talk
tried
about
it
them in a
though,
second. Yeah.
because you had talked about, and I saw you speak with other people too, about
Yeah.
italics just being muddy and people think that they can ignore them. So it's best to like concretize it in some
If you can,
action or
yeah.
dialogue. Yeah. And so I did that, and it was great.
Oh, good.
Yeah, especially for this
At
scene.
least that's what it works
It
out.
gives, it
Yeah.
gives the mother something to bounce off of or ignore and talk
Yeah.
over. Like it makes it a lot better. So I'm glad
That's
for that.
great.
Yeah.
Good. Well, let's look at the piece. And I want to talk about for a second that statement you originally came to me with. Sorry, I have to find the share screen button. There it is. I want to talk about that statement you originally came with. Somebody told me there's too much dialogue.
Yeah. What do you do when there's too much dialogue?
What do
Is
you
there
do when
such
there's
a
too much
thing?
dialogue? So, and I'm going to say this goes like, and Paige, this is less for you and just to anybody that listens to this. This goes for all editors, myself included, right? Like every editor, especially me, we all have our like things we harp on,
Sure.
right? We all have our own style. And as much as you want to say, I'm not editing for my style, I'm editing for yours, it's just not true, right? Like
Sure.
I am
You have to find that
applying,
rapport.
yeah. And it's not just rapport, it's about like, like we were saying earlier with authority, you have to like an editor's suggestions are great. You also have to take them through the lens of their own style. So
Sure.
like, I really don't like italics. At the same time, like you said, this genre has italics, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so you have to take in when you work with an editor like me who's like, I don't like italics. You have to take in the like, well, Jeff told me that, but that's his style. And that's something
Yeah.
like, but the genre says this, or like,
Yeah.
or my readers say this, or this is my style. And when I get there, I think there's a question that has to go a step further of like, if I keep it, why? So like, for example, my dialogue doctor partner, Laura, edits my stuff all the time. And I like to have conversations in my books that are funny to me, that make me laugh. Specifically, I remember I was writing a superhero book and I had a conversation where two of the characters are just sitting at the top of a parking garage looking over the city, talking about which one of them is Batman and which one of them is Robin. And I found it hysterical. It's like 15 exchanges. It was like one of my favorite conversations I wrote. She took a huge red pin through all of it. She's like, no, none of this. And so now Laura's style is action oriented and very to the point and very direct. And she doesn't like things that are just there for entertain, the author's entertainment.
Yeah,
and rightfully so, right? Like she's a much more like get to the point kind of reader and writer. And so knowing her, that this was her style, I had to ask myself, like, if I'm going to keep it, why am I going to keep it? And I think so I would just say, that comment, there's too much dialogue. There is a nugget there in your work, in my work too, of like, but we have to translate that to like, what does that mean for our style and for our genre and what that is? Because, like we were saying earlier, one of my biggest problems is giving editors too much authority, just people in general, and not actually translating what they're saying about it. So let's talk about the piece real quick. First off, I loved it. We start off with a woman cleaning dishes in a kitchen, having these.
Can I quickly add something to the conversation we were just having?
Do.
Because I process slowly.
Yeah. By the way, nothing about you, Paige, processes slowly. All right.
part of this as well is the draft number, the revision level, because in my 0 draft, rough draft, first draft, I I'm blocking things in
Yeah.
and shaping out the story and the characters and still finding the voice of the piece and the
Hmm.
tenor. And then I add in specificity later to
Nice.
vibe with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
That's really smart.
I usually know my characters pretty well going in, but I find the story and
Yeah.
like the external stuff, and I also find my motifs, like the metaphors that vibe
Yeah, yeah.
throughout, and then I can shape everything to that with the pieces of specificity.
That's great.
So now that I have all the specificity on deck, I was able in my revision from your notes
Yeah.
to add in specificity that like grounded
That's
things and
beautiful.
gave a framework.
That's good.
It was so helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Um, yeah, that's good. And I'm going to jump down in a second to talk about a place where I'm sure you're adding that specificity and why it has to happen there.
Mm,
Let's hold that for a second though. Um, because I want to give an overview of the piece first, and talk about what you're doing really well before we talk
okay.
about what you do. Because you're doing some things in here that are just fantastic that I think we can all as writers emulate, which is good. So the piece starts with a woman in the kitchen doing dishes and having this conversation with herself, which is great. And then there's a knock on the door. There's a conversation through the door. And then her mother comes bursting in with an army of cleaning people. And as her mother is cleaning, she and her mother have a conversation about the state of her life, and which is a hysterical conversation. And then we get through the state of her life and how she's unhappy, and we have this really beautiful emotional shift where she becomes vulnerable with her mother, and in the end they have this kind of uniting moment, right? Like, so things you're doing really, really well. There are some fantastic conversations in this piece, like just engaging and delightful, like this one right here. I loved she closed the door side and slid the chain open. I carried you inside my body, Pooja and Goldman. Now open the door this instant. Bang. Before the next bang, Pooja opened the door and the mother fell through. I'm too famous for this. Yes, Mom. Now, how can I help you? She righted herself and adjusted her blazer, looking around the unpacked apartment with cold eyes. Don't say it. She shook her head. Don't fucking say it. Oh, Pooja, the two most hateful words on earth. So, like, that interaction is just really beautifully done. Like, we can feel Pooja's emotional connection to her mom. We can feel like everything that's going on between them. The conversation between like what she's saying out loud and what she's saying internally is really good. Like, everything there's really great. And there's these moments between these two women that are just really engaging. And I really enjoyed reading. So that's there's sections in here where I'm like, wow, that's a great moment. Um, you also have these really great you have this really great emotional flow from
Oh,
her,
good.
like Pooja starting off in this place of internal frustration, right? Like, you show it with how she's washing the dishes, and how she's thinking to herself. So just reading her internal dialogue, I'm not going to think about her. I'm not going to think about her. Sorry. I'm not going to think about her, not going to think about her, not going to think about mistake, 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 release you encrusted bastard. So like the play between the dishes and her inner thoughts are give us a really nice kind of emotional context. And then the play between her and the door, right? What are you, sick? Open the door. Bang, bang, bang. No, I'm not opening this door. No one comes in this shitty apartment but me. Bang, I have a gift for you. It's not Hanukkah yet. There's a postal service for a reason, mother. Ugh, don't call me that in public. I'm not in public. Punja, open the door, right? Like, so this like back and forth, you move from that internal frustration and project that into the conversation with the mother. You then have the mother sitting and the maids rushing around, and then the frustration comes to the maids, and then at the end of the piece we go back to an internal frustration that leads to vulnerability. So you have this really nice emotional arc between the two characters, that you've like done really well in this scene, right? Like, I love a scene that takes me on an emotional journey. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you did a
I
really
have it
great job.
framed now with her singing it to herself. The I'm not going to think about her, not going to think about her,
Oh,
this to
nice.
this tune while she's scrubbing. And
Yeah.
then after she's fighting with her mother, she kind of like breaks down a little bit and she's like soothing herself by like humming. And
Oh,
then her
that's
mother
great.
starts humming it too and is like when she's
Oh,
stroking her
that's
hair.
beautiful. I
Yeah, so
love
it
the
like it frames
framing.
it a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's really great. That's really fun. Uh, yeah. And so, I'm trying to think. I had a third thing I really liked that you were
Oh, I'm
doing.
sorry I keep cutting you
No,
off.
please cut me off because otherwise I'll
I'm
just
so
talk.
excited to talk to
Yeah.
somebody.
No, please cut me off because otherwise I'll just
Quarantine
keep
has made
talking.
me even weirder.
Yeah, especially with kids. I'm like, if I have
Yep.
to have another conversation with my children.
An
Uh,
adult.
yeah. Yay. No, I do have teenagers now, and I will say they're more fun to hang around with when they're teenagers. You can
Oh,
actually have like real
wow.
conversations. Yeah. I'm
Oh.
loving the like teenage stage of life because we were talking about this before we got on the call, but my wife and I had three really quick. Um, so that we had at one point we had a 2-year old. Well, at one point she was pregnant. We had a 2-year old, a 4-year old, and a 6-year old. And those years, it was just like drowning in children. But now that they're 18, 16, 14, and 12, it's a lot of fun. So, because the teenagers in the house are great. Yeah. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So yeah, it'll come back to me what we are talking
Okay.
about. And I have actually notes and I can't read them because my handwriting's so bad. So that's
Oh,
not really
no.
helpful. Yeah. Okay. So those are the things I think you're doing really well. Really great dialogue. Oh, the character voices. That was the other one. Your character voices are strong. Punja and her
Good.
mom, I can always tell who's talking between the way the character voices
Good.
work. Her mom's far more aggressive than she is. Her
Mhm.
mom is always projecting forward. Punja is always pushing back. Am I saying her name right?
Puja.
Puja. Puja
Mhm.
is always pushing back. So it's that nice, it's that we can really feel the two voices interacting. So those are the things.
They're transitive verbs because I
Yeah.
did the Damon Suede verbalize with this as well. The mother
What's
is
the Damon Suede
Dragoon.
verbalize? I don't know what that is.
Oh, it's great. So he has two books on craft. There's another one that I think is on marketing that he wrote with a co-writer, but
Okay.
he has two books on craft, Verbalize, and then the companion thesaurus for Verbalize, Activate. And he
Nice.
talks about having each character encapsulated in a transitive verb.
Oh,
And then the thesaurus is all transitive verbs that are relevant to writers. And he
huh.
groups them in 4 different ways to where, like, when you have a feel for what you want the character to be doing in their character development and in the plot, you can find something that vibes with that. And then in each scene, they're using as a tactic a synonym of their transitive verb. And then
Interesting.
the other characters that they play off of, even if they're one off characters, if they are either an ally and a synonym or a adversary, what do you call them? You have a word for it. The
Oh, what do
person
I
that
call
they're.
them?
Yeah, I just watched your video on the 3 different
I call them engines and
reframing.
anchors. Allies and allies are engines and
What's the
um,
third one?
anchors and hazards.
Hazards.
Yeah.
So the people that are hazards are antonyms that
Okay.
they're butting up against and either
Interesting.
causing them to create growth or like
Huh.
knocking them down. So yeah, just having that framework is really nice to where you can be consistent with voice throughout the piece. And also, if you're having a series, you can just call up that transitive verb and look really quickly at a thesaurus and easily populate characters,
Oh, that's
easily
awesome.
remember the dynamics that you had between
Yeah,
characters.
yeah.
It's really helpful.
That's really cool. I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah,
I haven't read those books, so I'm gonna go
they're
read
great.
those. That's awesome. Um,
So Pooja is push,
okay.
and she pushes femininity
Yeah.
in interesting ways. And then her mother is Dragoon, and I forget what the anchor word is for her, but
Nice.
she's like very militant, but
Yeah,
she's
and
stand up comic, so she's militant in this like goofy kind of slapstick way.
I could totally
But
feel
she's
it
very
too in the
forceful.
piece. So you did a great job
I love a
translating those
Jewish mother.
words. Yeah.
Yeah,
You did a great job translating those words into their voices. It's really
great.
well done. Yeah. That's really funny. I had no idea that was a system. I'm gonna have to go look that up and read all about it now. Now
I
I'm
think it
gonna
would
go
work well with
obsess
your
over
framework.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about places to improve. And I specifically want to talk about how I would translate that phrase, too much dialogue,
Okay.
because there is something to it. And
Okay.
the thing there is to it is a lot of times strong dialogue writers forget spatial awareness. And so that's something that's happening here, is that because you're so in the dialogue, the character voices are so strong, you're losing that spatial awareness.
Mhm.
So we need to create the cinematic understanding for where the reader is.
Mhm.
For a strong dialogue writer like yourself, part of the trick that helps me is imagine your scene starts off in a fog, right? Like if you've ever played one of those like world building video games, a lot of ways this way, like the map is just a fog until you like
Mhm.
move your character around it, and then parts of the fog become uncovered. That's kind of what's happening in your scene for
Mhm.
your reader. So Pooja's room, everything we know about where she is when we
Mhm.
start reading this piece, it's just this fog. And so in the first, we get to see that she's at a sink, but that's all we know, is that
Mhm.
there's a sink. And then we get to see that there's a door and there's somebody banging this door. That's all we know. But it's not until we're well into page 2 and there's already maids in the room and there's already things going that you uncover that she's in this crappy, messy apartment where things are
Okay.
still boxed up and she doesn't know what's going on. So it doesn't take a lot, right? Like what
Yeah.
we don't want to do is add a huge paragraph up here that talks about like the room and what's going on, but a
Yeah.
sentence or two put in, especially in these transition moments where she's moving from one place to another. So when
Yeah.
she moves from the sink to the front door, giving us a sentence that's like overlooking the room and taking in what is about to see, sets it up for us in the first couple paragraphs so
Mhm.
that we know as the reader, like, oh, here's where we're going. And as I read your piece with that thought of like too much dialogue, that's really what I was seeing, was like, oh, there's no spatial awareness. The whole thing's happening in a fog, which is
Yeah.
that like the reverse of like too much dialogue. The solution is like, well, give us some spatial awareness so that we know how we're moving through the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And sprinkling in just like little pieces of specificity in the places that you highlighted was so helpful because I'm like, I see it now and it's framed, and being able to add in little things like when she walks to the door, her sweater catches on the formica that's like peeling off of the edge of the counter.
Yeah.
And then it slaps and she's trying to be quiet, and
Yeah.
just these like these little moments and these little sprinkles of like there's boxes everywhere and it's like a Stonehenge in her living room and they're all open
Yeah.
but they're all there, so you can tell that she's been like living like that for a long time.
Yep. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that
so
kind of
just sprinkles
intentional, yeah, that intentional like detail that represents the room and how she feels about it.
that I love
Allow
when I'm reading other stuff.
Yeah, that we like graft onto.
Yeah.
And it really allows our like movie focused cinematic brain to visualize what's going on, right? Like you're empowering the imagination of the reader.
Yeah, cuz I don't have that movie focused cinematic brain.
Really, that's
When I
interesting.
when I read, I just embody the characters and I feel what they feel.
That's great.
I don't picture
Yeah,
things.
that's
Yeah.
what's making your dialogue so strong, is that you're empathizing with the characters, which is really good. So working on that, empowering that weakness in yourself and understanding like, okay, I need to help my reader visualize what's happening and where everybody is with these critical details. And the place where they're going to really add well is in scene transitions.
Scene
When
transitions.
people like, in every scene there's many scenes, right? Like there's many moments. So like we said, we start at the sink, there's a bang on the door, and we have a mini scene transition to the door,
Oh, like a beat?
like a beat. Yeah,
Or is it
so
different?
no, we can call it a beat.
Oh, okay.
So like every beat change, that's where you want to add these details. So
Or do
moving
you
from
mean
this,
like cinegraphic scene?
yeah,
Like
no, I'm
the
talking
sink and
like
then.
beat works. So like
Okay.
whatever the language we want to use of like the different sections of your piece. um So I would say there's like opening with at the dishes, and then they move to the door, and then everybody comes inside, and then she chases a maid into another room, and then she comes back to the room with her mother, right? Like those are kind of the beats, the physical beats of the movement in the piece. At the
Hmm.
transition of each of those beats is where we want these descriptors,
That makes sense.
because adding them there doesn't interfere with the emotional flow of the conversation, doesn't take away from the interaction of your characters, because that's what we don't want to do is start interrupting what's going really well in the piece. So we want to drop them in these transition places to create, to take advantage of this moment where you're already allowing the reader's brain to pause, to give
Yeah.
the reader like the map of the room,
Right.
or like the
Because you need to
visualization.
take a breath anyway, and that
Yeah,
helps
they're
slow
already
things
taking a
down.
breath. So just give them a couple sentences to
Yeah.
stretch that breath out and let them see what's going on. So like right here, um, yeah, so I can mail your children postcards. Happy Diwali to you too, kid. We're here to clean. And with that, with a quick twist of her neck, the lady she's hidden up the hall were off, as though clean were an activation key, shuffling their feet in orthopedics. They left behind a wake of musty perfume scent trails. This is great, right? Like that they've come in. I need another sentence about what they're doing, because you let me see them rush into the room, but I don't actually see what's happening. So like, what are they doing to these boxes? What are they doing to the rags? What are they doing to the dirt? All that kind of stuff will allow us to like visualize this scene a little bit better. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Okay. Awesome.
Sorry, I'm just like consistently
No,
interrupted by smart people.
I am totally 100% with you. You have headphones in, so I keep talking, but I just want to make sure you actually
Oh yeah, I
could
can
hear.
totally
Okay.
hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I do that all the time and it doesn't bother me. Like I can be in the meeting and like deal with this kid and still be in the meeting.
Yep.
It's that
I've
like
got like
parent.
an 8-track brain.
Yeah, it's like that parent brain of like, yeah, no, I can do both of these things at the same time. But if you need me to stop, tell me and I'll stop.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, so finding those scene transitions and putting that descriptor, or putting that like revealing of the map in those
Yeah.
transitions already, is going to build it a little bit more specifically. So again, like here, you've got a good transition where you're talking to us about how people are moving, but you're disconnecting them from the space. So we need how they're moving in this
Oh.
space. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So the other thing we haven't talked about.
I also want to
Oh
ask, I don't know
yeah,
if this
go.
is a good time for it. I'm interrupting you again. I'm so sorry.
Please interrupt me. You have to interrupt me or I'll just keep talking.
So I know you encourage people to write a dialogue only first draft.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what I tend to do. Like when I'm in drafting phase, I'll like be up at 3 in the morning, just like writing back and forth dialogue, and then I'll flesh out around it the next
Mm-hmm.
day. So when you have that dialogue only first draft, what are your first steps?
Oh,
Like
great
what is the
question.
process of taking that into a
Yeah.
novel that reads and that has the spatial awareness and the if you want to talk about that after the thing that you were just gonna
No,
say,
no, that's
that's
really good
fine.
because they actually go together. So
Great.
you write the dialogue first draft, and then the first thing I do once I get the back and forth. And so just to describe for those who don't write that way, when you write that dialogue first draft, you don't want you just want the things in quotes and some kind of indicator to you as the author of who says those things.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal of this, I don't actually write this way all the time. It's more an exercise to make sure your scene is dialogue centric, so that it's actually the dialogue that's moving the plot, the dialogue that's moving the scene, the dialogue that's creating the emotional flow. Um, I've gotten to a place, and I'm sure you're this way too, where like I'm kind of writing a 75% dialogue draft. And then like I'm just adding body language and stuff in on the fly as I go. Cause my scenes are already dialogue centric. So I don't need that like extra piece to it. Um, so after I write that first, but if I'm doing dialogue only and I write that first dialogue scene, I don't consider them two different drafts. I think of them all as one draft. So I do the dialogue first, and then I immediately turn around and add in the spatial awareness. So where's everybody in the room? How are they moving? I'm adding body language, and I'm just reading through what I just wrote, and I'm making sure it can be visualized. So if somebody else enters the room, I talk about what the point of view sees, right? Like if it's third person point of view, it's that like third person camera. If it's a first person point of view, it's like through the eyes of that character and what that character's seeing. And as I'm writing what that character sees, I'm writing it in a way that tries to explain to the reader how the character feels about what they're seeing. Does that make sense? So it's that like the dialogue only is to make it a dialogue centric piece. And then my immediate next draft, because I try not to let a scene that's just dialogue sit without immediately going in and adding those like spatial awareness aspects of body language, how they're interacting with each other, how characters are moving in the space, and what the space is saying to those characters about how they feel in that context. Right. Like, so
Mm.
I put all those in immediately after I've done that second pass. I think of that as my first draft scene. And then my process is I tend to write all of the first draft scenes for a novel and then come back and do a second read. And after that second read, I'm kind of done with it. So that's when I try to give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That seems very healthy.
Yeah. So I also end up with a lot of like issues because I'm probably done with it a little bit too fast. I should probably do a third read, but yeah, I but that's just how I operate as an author.
Yeah.
So yeah, so when you're writing dialogue centric, what's your process? What are you going through to draft these pieces?
Yeah, so I have like two tracks. I
Okay.
have the poetic track where I'm painting with words and
Yeah.
I'm painting emotionally. So even if I'm describing something physical, it's all emotive and emotion centric because that's my background.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just comes through. And then I have the dialogue track where it's just like characters talking in my head.
Gotcha.
And then I just put that down. So it's usually like the middle of the night and it will not let me sleep. So that's why I have really tight drafting boundaries because I become a non-functional person.
Gotcha.
I'm just like, I can't sleep at all. I'm
That's really
like,
funny.
it's hard to even remember to eat or drink water or go to the bathroom. I'm just like
Yeah.
in the thing. I'm real fun come November.
That's fun.
But because it's National Novel Writing Month.
Yeah. 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 Oh, I was
But
following you.
but but yeah, so that process where it's just dialogue, I've never put that into a draft. I just put that in like a little note somewhere or I'll jot it down. And then when I'm drafting, I'll put it in more poetically and frame it a little more. This draft, because we were being encouraged to make it as simple as possible and as bare bones as possible, because Daniel has his 5 ones, like one
Yeah.
protagonist, this short duration, one desire, one location. And like I have not done that before. I tend to make very complicated things with lots of themes and meanings and what overlays with this myth from, too much.
Yeah.
But it's fun for me. So with
That's
this,
what's
I was
important.
really trying
It's
to
got to be
just
fun
write.
for you if you're going to finish it.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
I do. Like
Yeah.
that's my jam. I just don't ever show it to anyone else. And then when I do, they're like, "What? I'm not smart enough to read this." And I'm like, that doesn't help me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
want to write a thing that will resonate with you too and
Yeah,
will like
that's one of those feedback things that you actually have to like diagnose and be like, what does that mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the dialogue draft has not been a thing I've ever done before. I
Okay.
haven't given myself permission to do it. The things come and then I jot them down and then I put them into prose.
Yeah. And I
So
don't
this is
think
the closest thing to a dialogue heavy draft that I have, this
Okay.
rough.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it, right? Like the key is to like figure out what's working for us, like what's working for you as a writer, and is allowing you to actually like get things done on page, like get words on page.
I can do that all day. Like I have a million words or more down
That's so
on
nice.
page, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But to do anything with that and to be able to have it resonate with people and have this transformational experience
Hmm.
with the work, which would
Yeah.
be my ideal. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been touched by so many books and learned and changed, and I want to give that back.
Yeah.
So all of my books, I change through them, and I learn so much and am transformed.
That's nice.
And I don't want them to be like gobbledygook sitting in a drawer that just means nothing to anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be fine, like if I'm the only one that benefits, and then my kids through a product of me being what I am in the world. But yeah, I have just like books on books on books. So
Yeah.
it would be nice to be able to give them to the people that would be benefited
Yeah.
by
They're
them.
gonna benefit from. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and Michael Noltemeyer talked about. Am I talking too much?
no, no, no.
I'm so sorry,
I am
Jeff.
fighting back the urge to chase tangents, or we'll be here for like 5 hours. But no, I love what you're saying. Please keep going.
I'm the same way. So Michael Noltemeyer talked about overwriting and underwriting,
Hmm.
and then so an author, they can also like underwrite and overwrite, where you're not writing the things that are relevant to the plot and the character development, and you're over explaining like the room and the things
Hmm.
on the walls and the stuff that are not relevant.
Yep.
So overwriting is when you have so much stuff that the reader is like
Hmm.
overwhelmed by it, and they don't have to work to insert themselves in it and to feel it and embody it.
Yeah.
And then underwriting is when the reader has to do too much work
Too
to
much work.
understand and connect. And I don't know if this is a neurodivergent thing, but I seem to have a very difficult time finding that
Finding
sweet
the
spot
balance.
where we intersect. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I've only looked at this one piece, but my recommendation to you would be, again, your dialogue's great. I would draft how you drafted this piece.
Okay.
And then on your first pass, focus on those beat exchanges and making sure that the beats have in those change it where you're changing that beat when you're moving into that next like mini scene, that you're giving them spatial awareness that is meaningful. And your poetic background's really going to play well into that, because um the way you're going to force yourself to be efficient with words is going to keep it tight for you, which is good. um One other thing you got to do in that beat exchange is make sure you've wrapped up the previous beat.
Oh.
So you have to think of each of those beats as like a section of a song,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like a song has verse, chorus, bridge, verse. And our scenes have that same kind of melodic transition where we've got places that, you know, or like in, if we talk classical music, you've got like A B C, like we've got these like beat exchanges in a scene. The sections don't necessarily repeat, right? You may just have like A B C D.
Mm-hmm.
But like you were describing here, you've kind of got like an A B C A, right? Like where you've got this like internal frustration, and then you've got like the um resistance at the door, and then you've got like the C of the like resistance played with, and then you're coming back to A, which is like internal frustration, and then kind of like an A2, which is vulnerability. So you've got that like you know melodic flow, which is music and emotion are super connected. So you've got that like melodic flow, which is really your emotional flow.
Mm-hmm.
um we have to make sure we're bringing our A to a close, our B to a close, our C to a close as we transition into the next one. So for example, you have a line in here, I'm not going to scroll to find it, but you have a line in here where a maid runs into another room
Mm-hmm.
to do a bag, and she follows the maid in and says something to the maid. And then the mother responds, and you're moving right into your A. You're like the second A in the piece. You're going from B to the second A in the piece. We need to know how that maid responds. We need to wrap that beat. Does that make sense? So that we can move on to the next one. We need a strong cadence to that beat so we know that beat is coming to a close. And that cadence involves the give and take between the characters. So you bring this maid in as not just a group of people, but an individual character. When
Mm-hmm.
your character looks at the maid and is like, don't do that, before we can move on to the next beat, we have to know how the maid responds. Does the maid stop? Does the maid keep going? Does the maid completely ignore her and move on to the next thing?
I had
Does
her
the
like shaking and look at the mother with big
but
wet eyes.
it
That's not
doesn't give
enough
us
though. She has to like
she shakes and
respond
looks at
to.
the mother, but then we don't know if she stops cleaning or if she keeps cleaning. Like we didn't wrap the beat, right?
Oh.
Like she looks at the mother for guidance. The mother talks about something else. The mother takes us into the next beat, and we don't ever get how like the maid what the maid actually does. So in our minds, in the visualization of our minds, the maid is just frozen with like watery eyes. Right,
Oh
like we don't know what
wow.
happens, so you just need to give us
Okay.
a sentence or a couple words that tell us like, hey,
Right.
this is gonna where this is what happened back there, we're moving on to the next thing, to give
Okay,
us that
that
like
makes sense.
transition. But again,
Yeah.
it's happening in that like transition between beats, and it's part of that spatial awareness. But it's not about telling us what the room looks like, it's about telling us what the characters are doing and where they go. Does that make
That makes
sense?
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that because when I added to that from your note,
Mhm.
I just had Pooja taking the box of industrial trash bags from the thing. And then later when she has a trash bag, it's like a little tiny one. Like
Yeah.
they had another box of little tiny trash bags. But having the maid actually respond and do something makes
Yeah, so
sense.
you can
That
have her like take
she's
the
not just
thing
like frozen in
away.
space with sad
Yeah,
eyes.
and then you need like
Yeah.
just a couple words that are like, and the maid moved on, or like, or the maid, went this way, or and the maid huffed and stomped her foot and walked away. If you want a more like poetic, or like giving us the actual like emotional texture of the scene that that moment is requiring, or if we go back to
Yeah.
thinking of
That's
music,
not this lady. This
yeah,
lady's just like super sweet and just trying to like do a good job. And she's
that's
like,
really
oh my
fun.
God, I'm so sorry. Oh
But
no.
it is that like giving us that like resolution chord to
Yeah,
that part of the song, so that we
that
can
makes
move on to
sense.
the next part of the song.
Yeah.
um
Specifically when you said that we're still seeing her as like frozen in space with big wet eyes. Like,
yeah,
that's a problem.
you just
Okay.
leave her standing there, and it's like,
This
oh,
poor lady.
what happened to this poor maid? um yeah, so it again, don't add a paragraph, because talking
Right.
about overwriting and underwriting, I think our natural inclination is to add a full paragraph and to overwrite that, so that the reader like, oh my gosh, now I get all of it. We don't want to overwrite it. It's about finding that balance, and sometimes it's just a couple words to help us move on imaginatively in the scene
Yeah.
as we keep moving forward. But I
Makes sense.
think focusing on those beat exchanges where you're moving from one beat to the next, and making sure that we have spatial awareness and character awareness of like what's happening to the characters as we move into the next beat,
Right.
um, takes this
Like
from like,
blocking. Is that called blocking?
it is called blocking. Yeah. Yeah. I never
I'm
know what
terrible at
language,
that. I
I
never
never know what
know.
language people use.
I'm
So I
like,
was,
I don't know
yeah,
where they are in space. I don't know where I
yeah.
am in space.
Yeah.
This is
And that is
incredibly
what
difficult for me.
we are talking about, blocking that like
Blocking.
physical
Yeah.
presence, and spatial presence of where everybody is.
Yeah.
Blocking comes from the theater, where you've got people on stage and you're
Right.
walking through the physical, like, so before you read any lines, you're like walking through physically where everybody's going to be at a time.
Hmm.
um and that is, in writing, what's weird about the term blocking is, in writing I actually want writers to do the opposite.
Ooh.
I want all the words out first. I want all the dialogue out first. I want all the like emotive, because that needs to be central to the piece. The thing about blocking in the theater is that you already have a dialogue only script in front of you.
Right.
So while it feels like it's the first thing you do in a rehearsal, it's actually after all of the dialogue has been written and the emotional tone has been set. And then you come and you block it out. And so that's kind of what we do in our drafts, is we want to get all that dialogue in and get that beautiful exchange of humanity between people and their voices, and then come back and block it and be like, so they are moving here, this is what the room looks like, the maid she ripped the trash bags from the maid and the maid stormed away, right? Like that kind of like, okay, exit scene left, maid, and now we can focus
Right.
back on where we are. um and then when the maid comes back with more trash cans, we want to make sure we're saying like, maid enters scene right with trash bags in her hands, but we want to do it in a poetic and imaginative way that is actually reading like a novel, not the stage directions we get in blocking, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that is practically what we're doing. That was a big rant just to say like, yeah, you're right, it's blocking. um yeah. Okay,
So
that
when you
was
put that in, when you go through your second pass, so
yeah.
you have your first pass that's dialogue only, and then when you put in your second pass of the blocking and of the spatial awareness, is that in prose or is it just
It is, well,
sparse
so
language like a
what is
script?
prose and what is dialogue gets confusing when I and these are the way I use the terms, which is not the correct way. But when I think of prose, I'm thinking of standalone descriptive narrative language. And when I think of
Oh.
dialogue, I'm thinking of the interchange between characters. So body language I include in dialogue because it's part of the interchange between characters.
Okay.
Prose, I think of like something that pulls you away from that interchange and gives you a narrative of what's happening. So is
So
it in
to
prose?
clarify how I'm saying it,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of prose as opposed to poetry. So prose
Mm,
as being fully formed sentences and like close to what the final
gotcha.
text would read rather than
Okay.
like John moves over there, which you're not
Ooh.
going to have in the final thing,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
like and then he twisted his whatever, you know?
Yeah. So I think to
So how do you
save,
block it in?
yeah, so to save time, if you can block it in what you're calling poetry, I would
No,
do
not
it.
poetry, but just like fragmented sentences and
Yeah, if
like
you can,
notes to yourself.
the closer, okay, so the closer you can get it to the final product in your draft, the better for you,
Okay.
right? Like I don't I don't do a draft where I'm writing like, stage direction type breakdowns
Okay.
because it's again, for me, that's just another draft
Right.
that I have to edit. So like I don't want to, I don't have that kind of time, right? Like I got a full-time job, I got 5 kids. Like this isn't, I can't keep like, how many drafts of this am I going to do? It already takes me 6 months to write a book. Like, so all that to say, like, for me, it's the dialogue, and I'm putting those like a lot of times my dialogue draft looks like a screenplay. Like I'm just
Hmm.
using a letter actually for each character, and then
Mm.
like what they're saying to each other. And if there's something super important, I'll put that in. Um, but when I do that second pass and I try to get all of my like spatial awareness and body language and all that in, I'm trying to get that as close to my final draft as I can.
Okay.
Because why not?
Sure.
If you need that in between step though, I would do that in between step. Because again,
Okay.
there's no right way to do it. It's just whatever
Right.
works for you.
Something I also struggle with is the external plot. I don't have a
Mm,
good sense of that, and I don't tend to care about it in books, but I know it's really important for neurotypical people and like the average reader to
yeah.
have like, oh, she's got to get this thing done in 2 weeks, and like, oh, if she doesn't have a date to the party, it's gonna be. Oh. And
Yeah,
like, I have a tough time caring about those things or
and that's a different
figuring them
conversation.
out.
Yeah, I mean, you're a big reader. Jay Thorne and Zach Bohannon wrote the three-story method. It works
Hmm.
well for that because it
Yeah,
forces
I'm
you to have a
familiar.
conflict in the full story that has to be solved,
Hmm.
um, which drives that external plot. Yeah, I don't know. That's
Yeah,
tough.
because my even with the 3 story, my 3 C's are
Yeah,
usually abstract, emotional, character focused. Like,
yeah,
I have a really hard time even thinking about the
that's really
physical
interesting.
reality and the what's
Yeah.
actually happening.
Paige, your struggles are like my favorite struggles of a writer because I'm like, I wish I could get more writers to do that. Yeah, no, it's
It's
because
not great.
well, I think most of us lean on the other side where like our external plot is everything. It's all that we care about. So we lose the, internal drives that really make a story beautiful and are what actually engages a reader. So the external plot keeps the reader going to the
Let
end.
me tell you, my friend,
Yeah.
like Readers have not been particularly engaged
No,
with
I
like
get you.
completely internal stuff because they're
Yeah.
like, what's happening now? I don't.
Yeah. So let me
Why are we
rephrase
meeting
that.
this person now?
The internal plot keeps a reader engaged on the scene level, right? It's what makes a
Okay.
scene work.
People love my scenes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The external plot is what keeps them reading to the end of the book,
Which people don't do.
because they need a mystery.
They
They
don't do
need
with this
like,
stuff.
and I say mystery, the mystery for a romance is like, will they, won't they?
Right.
Like they need a mystery to solve to get to connect the scenes.
Sure.
Um,
What's that? Narrative tension?
Narrative tension is a good word for it. I mean, I used to cheat. I just built a spreadsheet that was Save the Cat across the top, like all the beats of Save the Cat,
Yeah.
because I too like lean toward that. Like I started writing short stories and like really just like microfiction, like 2,000 words. And
Yeah.
I just want to write this scene. I want to write two people fighting about this thing, right?
Yeah.
Like I want to put these two characters in a room together and see what happens, right? Like that
Yeah.
was, but like you're right. There's no story there. It's just like a whole bunch of vignettes.
See, like short fiction is hard for me because they just like punch you in the trauma and run,
Yeah.
and they're relying on archetypes and they don't resolve anything.
No,
Like I
no.
like to resolve things, but I
Yeah.
resolve them for me, like
Yeah.
the emotional
Like,
stuff
I
and the
feel good about
learning
it.
and the character
Yeah.
development. Like, look, they've been through so much and they're totally
Yeah.
like they leveled up now internally,
That's
which
really
you can't see and doesn't have any.
It doesn't
They're
matter,
like they're
but I
in the
feel good about
same.
it. Yeah. As the author, they feel safe to me, so I can move on. Yeah. And I think for me, the only way I got through it was I created a spreadsheet and forced myself to like scene out a story scene by scene. And
I've
then,
done a lot of that.
yeah, and then force myself to write to those scenes. That's the only way I could do
I've
it.
tried every method that I
Every
found.
method. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have a
I
magic
did
wand for you.
The
I'm
Virgin
sorry.
Promise. I did Hero's Journey.
Yeah.
I did Daniel's
This
method.
is
I've
great.
done
Yeah.
3 Story.
Yeah.
I've done Dan Wells'
Yeah.
method, and that was the most fun for me. So I don't know if you've seen his little. It's this short presentation that he did years and years ago, and he describes his like 7-point plot structure,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
where it's like the
I've read
hook,
it. Yeah.
pinch point,
Yeah.
and then da 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 da.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
way that he describes it, and especially talking about the matrix, how they're layered. So he has 4 different 7-point structures, and
Yep. And they're
where you
all
have more of them overlapping are the really intense inflection point scenes.
yeah.
So I use that to write that like literary family saga, Muslim sisterhood trauma
Yeah.
book that I wrote during my speculative
I
fiction
can
year.
see
'Cause
that
whatever.
because you said it was really complex. I was like,
And
yeah,
it was like,
that's a complex plot system.
oh my
Yeah.
hot goodness. Yeah,
Yeah.
that wound up, and nobody has read that. Nobody wants to read it. I'm like,
And you know,
but it's beautiful.
we say
No,
this,
nobody
we
cares.
lean so much on plot, but part of this also is just about finding the readers that connect with your work. Like, because I
Which I
think of
have
like
not yet.
people rave about Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, and there's no plot there. It's exactly what you're talking about.
And it's painful.
It's emotional scene after emotional scene after emotional scene that
Yeah.
kind of connect, kind of don't connect. I don't really know what's happening.
Yeah.
But people love it.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Why?
and
Where are those people? How do I get their
yeah,
number?
how do I find them? So what I'm saying is forget plot and just write for only Infinite Jest readers. That's, yeah.
Are you my enabler, Jeff?
I am.
Is
I'm totally
that where
enabler.
this is
Paige.
going?
Do whatever you want. Your character voices are great. If you write it, they will come, which unfortunately is not true at all. It's the opposite of that. Is actually
Just
true.
publish stuff as they are
That's
now,
right.
and like I'll put a quote on the book. Jeff said I could.
Jeff said I could. That's right. Jeff said I could. People will be like, "Who's Jeff?" He's this guy I was on a Zoom call with. He said it was fine. He said, "Don't listen to anybody else."
If
Yeah.
you enjoyed Infinite Jest, please suffer through this.
Please
with me.
suffer through this book. Yeah, like Infinite Jest, but half the pages. Yeah, yeah. So but all like, it is weird that we like hold up these plot structures to say like, oh, this is gonna solve the problem, and at the same time, there's always outliers that are
Yeah.
like they don't like that problem wasn't solved in this book, but it's loved. Like I mean, we did a book club on Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. There's no plot in that.
Yep.
It's literally just him moving from bar to
Intentionally.
bar. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, but people are captivated by the emotional scenes of that. Now there are also people who deeply hate it. Like, Laura in that book. It's really hated that book. But that's, I think part of the conversation you're having is about what do you write and how does it feel?
Yeah.
And that's a separate conversation from where do I find the readers to love this,
Right.
you know?
And like,
Yeah.
how can I show up in the world in a meaningful way?
Yeah. How can I be around? And like, how do I get who I am into the hands of people who need it and will find value in it
Find value in it.
for
Yep.
what it is. Yeah.
Yep. Can I tell you how
Yeah.
it started?
Yeah. I'd love to hear that.
So when I was during my speculative fiction year, I happened to come across this group
Yeah.
of professional writers
Nice.
that wanted me in their critique group.
Yeah.
And I had to like apply, and there was this whole deliberation process, and
Yeah.
they were like, "You are a good writer. You are excellent, and you may come in." I was like,
And you immediately gave them authority. You're like, you guys know everything. Yeah.
"Oh, you're like actively publishing. You've got
Yeah.
contracts with these people.
Yeah.
Like, look at your covers. These are beautiful."
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
And they're all like a little older than me, some much older than me. So I was like, okay, like I'm here to learn. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've gone through the first gate, and they were all writing genre fiction, and like didn't like literary fiction, had never read literary fiction, and my first fantasy book that I wrote was very literary fiction. that was the one that I used The Virgin's Promise for.
Yeah.
It was very dense, very allegorical, lots of myth. Lots of references that I'm really excited about and feel really beautiful and meaningful for me. All this chthonic gods and
Yeah.
but it's a story of a widowed pregnant mother and her two daughters. And then she's like walking between worlds.
Nice.
So there are these different layers, and she kind of like falls in love with her failed guardian angel.
Okay.
Who's like not a guardian angel.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know who he is. So
Yeah.
anyway, I had these very successful genre science fiction writers reading
Yeah.
that and giving me feedback and going like, like, there's no dilemma in this scene. Like, why do you have all these vignettes
Yeah.
of different characters? And I'm like, this book is 150 words long. You've read like 5,000 words. Like, of course you're not going to know the full
Yeah.
context of everything yet.
Yeah, but at the same time, from
at the
their
time, I was
perspective,
like,
as a genre
okay,
writer,
like,
yeah.
you said I gotta read Deb Chester, I gotta follow Jim Butcher,
Yeah.
I gotta do the Dan Wells, and
Yeah.
they gave me these resources, and so I just studied the bejesus out of them, and I'm still like doing that and trying to learn it and trying to. I tried to write genre fiction, Jeff. I
understand.
sure gave it a try.
Look, we all want to be the 20 books to 50K success story. Right?
I don't. Yeah,
I do.
I'm good.
I want $7 million a year. I do. I'm not gonna lie. I
Do you
want
know
that
how
money.
stressful that is, my friend?
You know what?
That's a
I
lot
would-
of chi to move around.
I don't have to acknowledge the pain of getting there to tell myself that that's what I want and chase after it. But yeah, but no, just to sympathize with you. Like finding your voice is tough. Like it's a hard place to be, and figuring out, where you fit, because it's not, like you're saying, it's the sad truth of our world is that it's not enough just to write an amazing book.
No.
You then have to like find the attention for it. And if you can do the genre thing, and if you can like follow the Jim Butcher plot line, fantastic. But if you can't, you're kind of on a different journey. And I feel the pain of you saying like, yeah, I don't write in this way that makes finding readers easier. And so now what do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been like whipping myself for it and just trying
you can't
so
do that,
hard to
though.
do the things that I'm supposed to do, and then like working so hard to do that, and then having people still read it and be like, this is confusing, and like I can't finish it, I'm not understanding.
I'm with you.
That was the simplest, most straightforward, following all the rules.
Yeah.
I thought I did everything right, and it's still just like,
Yeah.
I don't get it. This is too much. This
Yeah.
is
And 100% transparency. Like I'm writing 150,000 word, book that every day I'm like, who's going to read this? just think it's painful and it hurts and it's sad, and it doesn't fit cleanly into a genre. And like, I don't know who's going to read it, but you know, I have to finish it
Yeah.
before I can do something else. So I'm just hoping that like the next thing that the muse passes to me is actually like readable.
But then, like, if you keep being you, you'll find the people that love you
Hopefully.
and will read back through everything.
I mean, that's our dream, right? That's yeah.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
If it happens 200 years after I'm dead, that's fine, but it will happen if I put
Paige, we
my
just
stuff
got to keep
out
speaking
there.
it into the world. Just keep speaking it. Well, hey, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Where can people find your work?
So I have a website. It's my name, paigetheriot.com. And then I also, what's the other thing that I have? Oh, I have a YouTube channel.
Awesome.
So if you search my married name, Paige Theriot Smith, all one word,
Okay.
it should come up. I can give you the links for it if you want to put it in the show notes or whatever.
Yeah, I'll definitely drop them in the show notes. Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming on. I'm going to stop the recording and we can chat a little bit more.